Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lysha from Lysha Be Creative, and in today's tutorial I am trying my hand at what I'm calling a galaxy style geode tumbler. So this is yet another one of those trust the process video tutorials. I'm going to walk you through a lot of things that went all the way wrong, but show you how I'm able to turn it around to get our end result. So of course, everything I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked down in the description box down below. You'll even find discount codes as well as links to all of my social media and other platforms that you can follow me on. So let's go ahead and jump right into our Trust the Process Galaxy Style Geode Tumbler. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So today I'm using a true 22 ounce tumbler that I purchased from the Steel Magnolia. I've already spray painted the cup black, and I'm going to be applying a thin layer of Mod Podge here, and I'm going to do a true black glitter, which is basic blackboard, which I purchased from Peachy Olive Glitters. This is a fine true black glitter, so this will not sparkle under epoxy, and which is typically pretty normal for black glitters. The typical only way you can get those kinds of glitters to sparkle is if you add either a white glitter or a silver glitter to your black glitter to get it to sparkle a bit. But I'm fine with that because I'm going to be doing a lot of different glittering on top of this black base. And so I wanted that glitter as a base so that all of my glitter is level. If I was to do this right over paint, adding all my other chunkier glitters, it just would take so many more layers of epoxy to epoxy over, if that makes sense. But having this thin layer of glitter on there helps with when I'm applying my chunkies, because then I don't have to do as many coats of epoxy. So I'm just going to do one good coat of the basic blackboard glitter there, and then we're going to go into adding some of our other chunkier glitters over top of the black. So once that layer of Mod Podge is dry after an hour or two, I did spray seal mine with some clear gloss spray paint. I originally didn't know which glitters I was going to be adding, so I decided to seal it in the event that I was going to go into epoxy. But you don't necessarily need to do that part. You don't need to seal if you're going to just be adding glitter over top, especially if you're going to be adding glitter that's got a bunch of color over black. It would be fine if you got all of those extra sparkles into the black, because it would make that black glitter sparkle under epoxy. So what I'm doing is just applying a kind of a swirl of Mod Podge here that I'm then going to cover up with this super chunky glitter called Supernova. This is from Glitter Makes It. I have a discount code in my description box, so feel free to check that out to save yourself some extra money when purchasing glitter. So I'm just going to kind of do this swirl of Supernova glitter, and Supernova is a color shifting glitter, so it shifts from purple to green. It's a really cool glitter, something that I definitely have not used enough, and I really just feel like it gives me all the galaxy vibes when looking at this. So now I'm just going to take a gloved hand and just mash down the chunky glitter. I want to make sure it's really set into that Mod Podge there. That way, when it does dry, I can brush off the excess and give it a good seal before we go into any layers of epoxy. So once I have that done, I'm going to pick up my area here, and then we're going to add some chunky white glitter, which is going to be where we add our geode. Okay, so again, I am doing all this on top of this raw glitter. So I've grabbed quite a few glitters. I'm actually only going to use one, but I wasn't sure which white glitter I wanted to use. So I figured that I would grab a few and kind of make my decision as I was Mod Podging. So I made a very irregular geode shape. So one thing to remember about geodes is that geodes aren't straight. There's no straight lines in a geode, so they always have these very jagged edges. So I'm trying to recreate that with the edges of my Mod Podge spot here. So I'm going to fill in all of that area there, and we're going to lay down some chunky white glitter as kind of the base of our geode. So the glitter that I'm going to be using here is, we are using, I believe this is Chunky Parabatai. So Chunky Parabatai is from Peachy Olive Glitters. It's a glitter that has some very solid white chunky pieces, but also some translucent pieces, which I thought would be helpful in using this white glitter so that I really could get some different color variations when we add the alcohol ink. So what I'm also doing here is, you'll note that I am doing the geodes kind of on the opposite sides of the swirl. So I have geode section on one side of the swirl, and then down at the top and then down at the bottom, which I'm actually also going to go over the bottom to kind of create an open faced geode on the bottom portion of the cup on the flip half of the cup, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I made a very irregular pattern on the bottom, and then I'm going to fill that in with the chunky parabatai, and then I'll just use my gloved hand to push down that chunky, because I want to make sure all that chunky glitter lays down flat and doesn't stick up, because obviously we know that can be a huge hassle when it comes to doing any layers of epoxy. So I'm going to just pat all this chunky glitter down. I'm going to let it dry for a couple hours before we come back and add some alcohol ink. So now I'm ready to add some alcohol ink here. So my cup is dry. All the Mod Podge is dry. I'm now just using a dry chip brush just to brush off any of the excess glitter that didn't stick to my Mod Podge. And now we're going to be working with some alcohol inks. So I am pouring out 4 medicine cups here and dumping some alcohol ink in there. I am going to switch from a few methods of applying this alcohol ink just to kind of see what gives me the best look. So the colors though that I am using are Wild Plum, Amethyst, and Glacier, which are Ranger alcohol inks, and then I have this teal, which is a Pinata brand alcohol ink. So I first started out with using a paintbrush, thinking that I should just paint on the alcohol inks, and I think this was great for fine details, but it definitely wasn't cutting it with the darkness that I was hoping to get out of these 4 colors. These colors are so vibrant that I wanted really to be able to pull all of that out. So then I switched to makeup wedges, like I would normally apply alcohol inks on glitter, but I still wasn't quite getting the colors that I wanted. It still looked very separated, and what I was trying to go for here was more of a blended look. So I then ended up switching to just taking my bottles of alcohol ink and putting different drops all over those sections and doing it that way. I was using my makeup wedge to kind of push out some of that alcohol ink liquid so that it didn't blend too far to one side or the other. But I definitely was getting a darker and more vibrant look when I was applying it directly to the tumbler instead of trying to use a makeup wedge to apply the alcohol ink. So this does obviously use way more alcohol ink than you would probably normally use on a tumbler, but I really wanted my colors to really blend well. I just felt that these 4 colors really, for me, represent galaxy, and I wanted them to look like they belonged together, and so that you couldn't see like where one color started and the other one ended, if that made sense. So I end up switching literally right to dumping out of the bottle. Some of my alcohol ink did spread on the outside of where the white glitter was. Not a big deal. I just would clean it up with either my makeup wedge or a dry paintbrush. You can't see it obviously because it's over black glitter, which is why I chose to make my geode base the white glitter versus trying to do it over black, because you wouldn't be able to see any of these gorgeous colors over a solid black tumbler. So I'm just going to continue to kind of add colors where I want. What I love about when I was adding them directly to the tumbler, the colors, versus trying to paint them on, is I was getting more blends and more different colors in between where the 2 alcohol inks met than I was when I was trying to use a paintbrush. So once I get that top geode done, I'm going to focus on the bottom. The bottom is a little bit, not harder, but a little bit you have to keep in mind, because the thought of this part of the geode is that this is like a split open geode. Obviously the other one is split open too, but this is essentially like a broken open piece, almost like that bottom portion of the cup is broken and missing, and you can only see the inside of the geode, if that makes sense. So making sure that what is showing on the side of your tumbler also meets and connects with the bottom portion. So definitely something to keep in mind, so you don't treat those as 2 separate geodes, but one whole geode itself. So I'm going to just do the exact same process I did with that top geode. Again, literally applying my alcohol inks directly on top of the glitter here, as opposed to trying to use other methods of application. Certainly do whatever fits for you and works for you when trying to recreate something like this. So we're going to go ahead and let these alcohol inks dry a full 24 hours. Before I do anything with this, I will put this back on the turner for 2 coats of epoxy. Each of my coats of epoxy are using amazing clear cast quick coat, and I am doing a full 30 mLs, really laying it on there so that I don't have to do more than the 2 coats, so that I'm ready to go into sanding and then adding all of my Milky Way work along the side. So let's go ahead and get to the next step. After my 2 coats of epoxy, it's now time to sand. So we're gonna really just focus on the top rim. I got pretty good coverage with the epoxy, so really just the top and bottom rim need the most focus. I think I had 1 or 2 kind of sharp spots from my chunky glitter along the side, but really definitely the focus was on the rims. So I'm just going to go around with my 60 grit sanding block to create that fine line of stainless steel to make sure that my final coats of epoxy do adhere to the rim of the cup and not the very top. So once I feel like I'm done sanding the top rim, I'll then move to the bottom just to smooth out any rough edges that I have, especially with that chunky glitter along that bottom side, right where that geode is. I wanted to make sure that I got that nice and smooth so that we could continue working on the cup and not end up with a wobbly bottom. So I'm gonna just then move on to my 100 grit sanding block here just to smooth out any of the roughness after using the 60 grit to knock everything down. And then we're just going to take this upstairs and clean it with dish soap and water, and then we can go ahead and put this back on the turner so that we can get the Milky Way situation going. Okay, prepare yourself because here's where everything went very, very wrong. So I have my cup back on the turner here, and I have mixed up about 30 mLs of epoxy. I've mixed up that much because I'm going to be using a lot of different mica powders and dyes to dye some of this epoxy to create some of that Milky Way galaxy look over that supernova glitter. So I'm doing a pretty decent layer of epoxy over my cup to start before I start mixing in all of those other colors. So I'm just going to make sure I have everything nice and covered on my cup. I then will torch my cup with my thin coat of epoxy here before I separate all my colors or my epoxy into cups to get all of the dyes and micas that I'm going to be using prepared and ready. So just off shot here, I have about 4 cups of epoxy all split up, not evenly, but just a little bit in each of the cups. I'm then going to be adding all of my dyes. So I am using Alumilite's white epoxy dye in one of my cups. I have a Wicked mica powder from Woody's Goodies that I'm adding to another cup, so just a little bit of that. And then I'm going to be adding 3 colors that I have had for quite a while. So I got them from for Christmas quite a few years ago. They're actually soap dyes, but obviously you can use the same kind of micas that you'd use for dyeing soap for using in your tumblers. So I have 3 different colors. I have like a light pearlescent blue, I have a violet purple, and then a color that's called aquamarine, which really was more kind of a gray color in my epoxy over the black glitter. So I am just putting just a little bit of that in each of my separate pots of epoxy here, and now I'm just going to give them all a nice good mix. So there is the white epoxy dye that I have all nice and mixed up, and then I'm going to mix up all the other colors before I start adding them to my tumbler. So the idea here is that I am trying to create kind of a galaxy look, space look along that supernova glitter. That's that swirl in the center. And then my geodes would just be on either side of those. So that was the aquamarine. And then finally, I'm going to do the violet purple. So I wanted to do kind of the exact same thing that I have done before when I do Milky Way tumblers. So in my head, this was going to work out perfectly. And for a little bit, it looks great, but then things go a little bit crazy, but I'm going to walk you through the process here. So I'm going to start with my lightest color, which is my blue. So I have a little silicone tool that I'm using to apply all of my colored epoxy here, and essentially what I'm doing is just creating lines and things along the supernova glitter. So I'm kind of going all over because I'm trying to cover up all of the negative space, but I'm also trying to be mindful as to not get any of that mica on top of my geodes. I want those to kind of be by themselves. So now I'm going in with the aquamarine, which again turned out to be more of like a silverish gray. Charcoal gray, and now I'm going in with the violet purple that I had, which was the soap dye that I was doing, and then I'm going to go in with my Wicked from Woody's Goodies mica powder. So this has like it's very fine glitter, this mica powder. It really is beautiful, and you're going to see me use that again towards the end. So now that I have what I think is going to be all the colors that I need, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of white. The white here was meant to just kind of highlight and pull out some of the micas that I had added to epoxy. Definitely less is more with white, and you're going to see me wipe out quite a bit of this too. I kind of go a little heavy-handed to start, and then as I'm adding heat with my heat gun, I'll then pull out with my gloved hand anything that I think doesn't look right. So now I'm taking my heat gun. You guys have seen me do this before in my pink Milky Way tumbler tutorial I did quite a few months ago, but I'm using my heat gun here just to push around the micas and the different dyes and get them to kind of blend together, kind of swirl and move around a little bit. So that's essentially what the purpose of the heat gun is. I do stop my turner in order to kind of control my heat and getting all of my colors to blend a little bit. So this is definitely a process in general when you're doing this kind of look as far as like Milky Way goes. It's definitely something that is going to take time to not only perfect, but each time you're going to notice that something different happens. So it doesn't always go exactly as planned every single time you go, but also know that you do have full control to pull out some of those colors with either your gloved hand or, you know, a silicone tool to pull out any colors that just aren't working for you, look muddled, they look too big. But really the focus here of my heat gun here is just to kind of blow out and fan out those colors, especially the white, because the white was starting to take over. And so once I have done kind of a bit of heat, I know that I'm getting my epoxy to move, so now I'm going to kind of slow down, let that turn again, and just start using my gloved hand to pull out any of the colors that are too much. So anything that just kind of looks out of place, kind of looks a little weird, isn't giving me the galaxy vibe that I was going for, I'm pulling out. I'm also pulling out anything that is touching my geodes, because again, the idea here and the goal here was that I didn't want any of the mica powders or dyes to be touching the geodes, because I wanted to be able to do something different with those pieces. So I'm just going to keep applying heat a little bit at a time and then pulling out anything that I feel like doesn't fit. And so everything was great at this point. Everything was starting to kind of come together. It wasn't perfect, but I could kind of see a little bit of my vision kind of coming through. And so I did what any tumbler maker would do, and I walked away, right? The problem with walking away was I had applied a little bit too much heat to my tumbler, and my Milky Way colors started to meld over into my geode areas. So I'm going to fast forward to that section and just kind of show you what kind of ended up happening after I had kind of left it alone to walk away. And again, I wasn't 100% thrilled with how this looked, but I knew that I could do something with it. So after coming back to my cup, this is kind of what I came back to. So what I can definitely say is this was a result of my heat. So I added probably a little bit too much heat to my tumbler, and so my epoxy still was moving, and so it was carrying a lot of the Milky Way pieces over into my geode. So it was one of those things where I wasn't thrilled with, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to go with it, and let's create something beautiful from this cup. Alright, so we obviously know I wasn't super thrilled with how this came out. Here's kind of an up-close shot of that cup, but we're going to kind of still go with the flow. I have some divots and things too, which is also a result of too much heat applied. So those will be fixed in the final layers of epoxy, but now we're going to add a little bit of some decals to this cup, some stars, to kind of still give this that galaxy geode feel that I was going for. Alright, so I have a bunch of different sized stars that I cut with my Cricut, and so I just decided that since I was going with the galaxy theme, although it wasn't my original idea to add stars, I figured that I would add some actual shaped stars to this to just kind of fill out some of where the Milky Way went awry, if you will. So I have 3 different sized stars, and I'll list all of the sizes in the description box, but I also have solid stars as well as offsets. So I didn't do a full walkthrough of Cricut Design Space like I have done in the past, because you guys have seen me create an offset in Cricut Design Space. So the offset setting for these stars was 0.111, which is my favorite offset setting. It gives me just the perfect thickness that I am looking for when creating offsets. So I'm using these stars of different sizes to create just to kind of fill up some of the empty space. So I'm especially going to focus on the flip side in between the 2 geodes where I had no Milky Way anything. Originally, my design idea was to add like a stars, you know, sun, moon, and stars style quote. But when things started going kind of left, I just didn't think that that was really going to fit here. So I'm going to add these stars just kind of to those empty spaces. So I'm adding them kind of at the top of that along the top side of that geode, just downward following that supernova center glitter, and then the same thing on the bottom, just following that in an upward pattern in the bottom portion of this cup as well. So I'm just kind of adding these sporadically, nothing too crazy. None of my stars were any bigger than 1/2 inch, just because once you get any bigger than 1/2 inch, they really do kind of just start to overtake your entire tumbler. And I obviously already had a lot going on, so I definitely didn't need anything else kind of overtaking the cup, so to speak. So I'm going to speed through this section here just a little bit farther, just so you can see me apply the rest of the stars here, and then we're going to jazz up our geodes to kind of get those out in the forefront. So with my stars applied, I'm now going to focus on my geodes. So I am taking a black acrylic paint pen and I am just outlining the very edge of the geode. And I'm doing this because I'm going to be using my mica powder from Woody's Goodies over top of this, but I really needed to be able to define that line. Because some of the Milky Way was kind of covering up where I could see that line. And so I wanted to make sure I had a line to follow when I was going to be applying that mica powder. So now I'm going to take my silver paint pen here and I'm going to do the same thing, kind of separating the blue and purple areas here. A very just irregular line again, because geodes are not perfect. They have no perfect lines within them. So I just decided to kind of outline an irregular line in that center area. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be adding a little bit of silver foil flakes as well as some mica powder to my geode here. So I'm going to be using Tack-It, and as you guys know, I don't like to dilute my Tack-It. I use Tack-It just straight from the bottle. Clearly I need to get a new bottle because I am clearly completely almost out of this. So I'm going to add just a little bit of Tack-It, and I'm going to use a very fine paintbrush to help me paint in the lines so that I can make sure that my foil flakes are only going to land and stick to the Tack-It portion of the cup and nowhere else. So now I've got my silver foil flakes, which I will link down in the description box, and I'm going to use my Tack-It with my fine precision paintbrush here, so my really thin paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint that silver line so that I can apply my foil flakes. So I'm just going to take my tweezers here and just apply the small foil flakes along my silver acrylic paint line there. So, you know, no real craziness here. I didn't even let my Tack-It dry, only because I didn't really feel like it was necessary. I did know that I didn't want to use Mod Podge because Mod Podge is quite a bit more slippery than Tack-It is. So I wanted everything to stay put where I put it, and I didn't want it to migrate or move somewhere I didn't need it to. So once I have it all applied, I'm just going to take my finger and really press down and make sure that it is all stuck to my cup. And then I'm going to take my dry brush here and I'm just going to brush off pretty rough, pretty vigorously, to brush off any of the extra foil flakes that don't need to be there. So now that I'm kind of done with that piece, I'm then going to move into doing the black outline. So with the black outline, what I'm doing is I am going to outline this with Tack-It again, and with the Tack-It I am going to be applying over top of that my mica powder. So this is that Wicked mica powder that I got from Woody's Goodies. Any kind of mica powder will do. Whatever color you want to outline your geodes with is perfectly fine. I just chose this because it's what I had on hand, and I really do just love the sparkle that I get from this mica powder. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my little paintbrush here with a little bit of Tack-It, go along that black line there, and then taking another small paintbrush, I'm going to apply my mica powder with just that dry paintbrush and just kind of dabbing it all the way around that black line. Once I finish one geode, I'll then move on to the second geode on the bottom and do the exact same thing I did with the other. So yeah, that was kind of it. So I kind of just added some more detail to kind of pull out more of the galaxy of this cup. I definitely think that this will be a cup that I remake in the future with a clearer vision. I think I have a different way that I can get the vision that's in my head still to really show true on the cup. So I'm hoping that I'm able to do that in the near future. So definitely stay tuned to my social media. I'm sure I will be doing that in a future live, either on Facebook or Instagram soon. So let's go ahead and look at the final cup. I did do 2 final coats of epoxy, of course, of the amazing Clear Cast Plus, so that it has that added UV protection. And yeah, so definitely let me know what you thought of this cup in the comment section. It definitely was interesting, but you guys know me, I would much rather be completely transparent with you and let you know kind of my process and when things don't go right, because cup making is definitely a process. Things go great some days and other days not so much. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did, definitely make sure you give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again next week. Bye!